Welcome to This is What Democracy Sounds Like. I'm Kevin Prang. This program is a presentation of Metropolitan Congregations United. MCU is a community organization that brings together religious congregations, community groups, and individuals to work for a common purpose, to create a better life for all residents of the region. We work at the intersection of race, economy, political power, gender, and the structures of oppression at work within us individually, within our organization, within the community. We are working towards building people's control of the government, building community control of the economy, and expanding the public sphere and creating structural racial equity. Today, my guest is Joshua Saleem, the Peace Education Program Director of the American Friends Service Committee. Today, we're going to talk about alternative discipline and empowerment of students within schools and what all that entails. And first of all, Joshua, welcome and thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. It's great to be here with you.
So I know in my introduction, I sort of butchered what you're about, what your programs are about, and what you do. So take me back and tell me, when you go into a school, what are you looking to achieve?
So first of all, we are looking to achieve community and build community, a sense of community. At the same time, our mission is to partner with the young people, with the students in a particular school, to help them gain a sense of their own power to create change in their school, but then also in the community. And we've done that since I became the program director for AFSC in 2012 up till now, so the last 8 years or so.
Where are some of the schools that you've been involved at, and how are things going right now during the pandemic?
Yeah, so that first year that I came on board, the 2012-2013 school year, we were in 3 schools. One of them in the Ferguson-Florissant School District. One of them was a charter school that was actually down the street from our office at the time. And then Northwest Academy of Law in St. Louis Public Schools. And I would say the strongest partnership that we've had through the years has been with SLPS. And since 2012, we've been at Northwest. We've also been at Sumner. We've touched Vashon and Roosevelt at different points, doing more kind of push-in education, not necessarily programming. But yeah, we've had different relationships throughout the years. And COVID, the pandemic, has definitely been an issue. We kind of had to interrupt our year of programming. We were doing peer mediation at Northwest Academy of Law last year and had to stop. And so our school-based programming has been on hold as schools have been in between virtual and in person. We've just kind of been on hold doing more advocacy work and engagement with young people outside of schools through the pandemic.
How is the pandemic affecting the students, especially at that high school age, where there's a little bit more freedom involved? And so how are you interacting with them? How are you helping them during this weird period that we're going through?
In a number of different ways. The same things that adults are going through are the very same thing that our young people are going through. So just a sense of grief of having to be inside, especially now that it's winter. I've talked to teachers and the young people and my own kids who, were very excited about the prospect of going back to school. So I think there's a level of appreciation for the school and education in a way that we took for granted before the pandemic. I've also heard from young people that because they're at home, there's just a lot more conflict and a lot more tension there, which is natural, which is happening all over the place. And I think something that is maybe unique to our young people in high school is the reality that they are having a difficulty finding jobs and work through a pandemic. And so we've tried to do what we can to support in that way. And we've had a number of showcases where young people have been able to submit kind of art or just maybe it's a letter saying this is how the pandemic is impacting me, and we'll send a gift card for them submitting that. So we've tried to kind of shift our programming and pivot in different ways to support the needs of young people that are going through with the pandemic with us.
Okay, great. Now you had mentioned that you had sort of the strongest program at Northwest High School within the St. Louis Public Schools. So can you talk a little bit more about that, about a school needing to fully commit to this type of program?
Yeah. And so I guess this is a good time to kind of talk about what we mean when we say restorative practices and restorative justice. And so the International Institute for Restorative Practices kind of distinguishes between the two. And for restorative practices, they talk about that being about proactively building relationship and community to avert conflict and harm. So kind of getting ahead of things. And then restorative justice is reactive and sort of set in motion after there's been misbehavior or, a conflict is erupted. And so restorative justice is in that way reactive. And so in the school context, I think you definitely need restorative practices because if you're only just sort of putting out fires or trying to put out fires with restorative justice, it's not going to be as effective. I mean, I think it can work, but it's not going to be as impactful. You're not going to have that community or sense of community and strong ties to the school that you would have if you take a restorative practice approach. And a restorative practice, for example, would be like a check-in or like a welcoming circle at the beginning of the day where students are coming in. Typically, teachers might just start the lesson or start their day without acknowledging that, students are bringing in what they're bringing in, whether it's a fight that they had with their mom that morning or a weekend and some tragic event has happened. Restorative practices allow, I think, our students and teachers to be whole human beings in the school context. And then when you add restorative justice to that, when there has been harm, there is an understanding that this is how we're going to deal with it. Because if you what I've seen, it's been difficult to, for example, do a restorative circle. So let's say that there's been a fight that's happened and you try to do a restorative kind of conflict resolution circle with some young people. If they haven't been introduced to the concept of a circle prior to that, it's really difficult to have them fully engage and really feel that they can be open and vulnerable in that restorative conflict circle. So I really feel like schools need to have that approach, and in order for this to work, it has to be all in. We got to be all in with restorative practices and restorative justice. It can't just be an option that they choose some of the time. It's got to be kind of our first go-to for how we respond to student misbehavior.
It sounds like what the restorative practices do is it builds relationships first, and that if and when you get to restorative justice, then the relationships are already there, so that if there is a student-teacher conflict, they've had a relationship before that. If there's a student-student conflict, they have a relationship. And so as you go through the process of the restorative justice, you're dealing with a person you have a relationship with, hopefully a caring relationship with. And so it's easier to ratchet that down a little bit.
Exactly. That's a beautiful way to put it. Those restorative practices build a relationship and then allow that relationship to really strengthen when there has been tension or conflict. It allows you to more easily work through that conflict as opposed to avoiding the conflict or simply kind of stepping around it. There was a situation the year before last where a young person was suspended because of a fight that had happened. And we were in contact with the teacher who was kind of facilitating the peer mediation circles with us. And the administration approached us and said, we're worried about this fight escalating again. They've been out of school for a couple of days, and we don't want it to continue. And so we had what's called a restorative kind of reentry circle, where we sat down with the student, with the teacher, with the assistant principal, myself and my colleague, Jonathan Polfus. And it was just a time of sharing, and communicating to the student, hey, we know you're back. We know this happened. We want you here. We don't want the behavior that caused you to be suspended to continue. And it was transformative in terms of the relationship that she had with that teacher, because they knew each other through class, but she had never heard from the teacher, because one of the questions is, what do you value? What do you appreciate about the young person sitting here? And she had never heard that from the teacher or from the vice principal. And so it's a beautiful space to be in, and one that we don't have often enough in schools, spaces where we can appreciate one another and let folks know, hey, this is not okay. We don't want you to continue down this path, And she didn't. They were worried about the fight continuing, and it didn't happen. So I share that just as an example of the things that can come out, the beautiful things that can come out of restorative justice.
And then it becomes we don't want you to go down this path because we care about you, as opposed to, we just don't want you to go down that path, and we're going because we want to restrict you. It becomes, again, a relationship, a mutual relationship, as opposed to a us versus them situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So let's take this one step further. Your organization also works on building advocacy power within students. So it's not just about getting along, but also having the students be aware of things that aren't right, and empowering them to speak up in that situation. Talk to me a little bit about how that works and things along those lines.
Yeah. So the traditional, what's called the retributive or punitive model, kind of lays out what rule was broken, who broke it, and what's the punishment. Restorative justice asks who was harmed, what do they need, and how do we repair that harm? And in the retributive punitive system or approach, young people are really having things done to them. So they didn't have any say on developing those rules. Definitely don't have any say in how punishment is kind of laid out. In the restorative approach, young people are actively involved in answering those questions of what's the harm that's been done? How can I repair it? It's an approach that's naturally, I think, more, there's more of a sense of empowerment and agency when you're not just saying you broke this rule, therefore you get this punishment. You're saying you really have the young people, especially for those who are who have caused the harm. In this approach, they get to think about the impact of their actions and who they have harmed in a way that, if we're simply saying you disrupted this class, therefore you get in school detention. In the restorative process, there is a time and a space for them to think about, hey, I disrupted this class, and I might have caused someone because of my actions, they weren't as prepared as they could be for the test that came next period. There is time and space for that level of accountability and understanding that just doesn't happen when you have a purely punitive approach and model.
And then in addition to that, the students then have ownership in the school atmosphere. Then it is their environment, and not one that they're being forced to be in, which I think all of us at some point have felt that about school. Oh, I don't want to be here. But that this is where I want to be, and I want this place to be a good place for all of us. So it adds some ownership for the students.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure.
Tell me about define peer mediation and how that's structured.
So I'll say, and when we first started, we kind of knew we wanted to focus on violence in the community, and our curriculum, our conflict resolution curriculum, called Help Increase the Peace. It helps young people connect how violence that we witness and experience in our community is connected to societal injustice. So we talk about racism, poverty, all those different kind of bigger issues that fuel the violence that we see. And so that first year, we had young people do a project where they kind of named the issue of violence, did some research, and they presented to the school community their findings. That next year, we had a group of young people. Again, we did that curriculum. Their project that they wanted to do was peer mediation. They wanted to have a space where they could help de-escalate conflict without adults, and that they could help their peers just kind of wade through relationships, wade through conflict that they were going through. And so we supplied the training, the administration. We had some leaders who kind of stepped up and said, we want to do this. And then we had some teachers, administration identify some more students. And so we did that training and allowed them to do what we knew that they could do. And so they would hear about conflicts that were brewing from social media or, stuff that happened on the bus. They would bring it to us. I think we met probably two to three times a week on A or B days. And in that session, in that time, they were identifying conflicts. We would find those students, bring them in, and then they would have a time to walk, just talk with them about what was going on. There was an adult in the room. Sometimes I was there, sometimes it was a teacher, but we were just there to make sure stuff didn't go out of hand. And it really never did. And I think that allowed the young people to feel like we trusted them to do what, we knew that they could do. It is a beautiful thing to watch when young people kind of step up in that way. And
so what's the reaction of the peers? I just remembering from when I was in high school, if there was a group going around school, saying, "Oh, well, you're doing wrong. We need to talk about this." The other kids would say, "Yeah, right, sure." So how does buy-in come from all parties in this?
I think we've tried to address that by one having, we typically have upperclassmen who are the mediators. So if there are stuff happening or things happening at the freshman, sophomore level, there's kind of a level of we're in charge as the seniors, juniors. So what we say goes, and the underclassmen have to go with it. But then at the same time, we also have been intentional about involving not just the kids with good grades, but really reaching out to those young people who might be classified as the hall walkers, like the kids who aren't in school, and giving them a level of leadership and visibility that they historically have not had, and saying, like, we see something in you, we see leadership in you, and we want to develop that and tap into it. And so these might be the kids who are known for getting in trouble. And once you give them some responsibility, they start to change in other ways. And in that peer mediation setting, they have the credibility with those other students who are getting in trouble, to say, hey, you should come into this process and enter into it. And it's okay to be vulnerable. They have the credibility with those students who are getting in trouble, in a way that, the typical, teachers' pets or A students don't. Not to say that there are some who don't have credibility with both, but we do try to get a mix of students who are typically in trouble, but then also students who are more of the honor roll type students as well.
Okay. And thinking back to our earlier conversation, I guess if you're doing those restorative practices first, relationship building first, then that trust factor is there to be vulnerable when you need to.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
So what kind of resistance do you get from teachers, administrators, schools, and how do you overcome that?
Yeah, that that's real. Thank you for naming that, because when we first started talking about restorative justice, I still got this reaction from some, not in SLPS. There was a friend of a friend whose father is a teacher, and we were kind of talking about our work, and I mentioned restorative justice, and he kind of rolled his eyes and said, "Oh, you mean that kumbaya stuff?" And we were like, and that's typically the reaction that you get. It's like you're being soft on kids. This is some kind of hippie stuff, because I think the approach that we've had for so long is that we need to be hard on kids. We need to have kind of strict discipline and punishments when they've misbehaved, because how are they going to learn otherwise? And so that's been some of the pushback that we've gotten. I would say at Northwest, because the leadership, they had this approach. That first year, some of the teachers were on board, but then it grew and grew. I would say the most resistant that we got, resistance that we got, was from the security professionals who were in the building, who kind of have to be in the front of situations when there are fights. And so I remember a fight kind of blowing up right out. I had an office in the school at the time, and it blew up kind of right outside my door. And I overheard one of the security professionals saying, all y'all are going to do is send them home, and they'll be back tomorrow fighting, because you're just soft on you're soft on kids. And so that's been a criticism. And I would say to that, we have said to that, the punitive system, in my view, is softer on kids, because you got some young people who would rather just take a suspension than enter into a conversation where they're going to have to talk about the impact that their actions had on their peers. They would love to just go home rather than enter into a circle where they're going to have to be vulnerable. And so in some ways, the restorative process is a lot more difficult, and it is more accountable than the punitive system. So those are some of the critiques that we've gotten through the years, that it's being soft on kids. You're letting them off easy. They need to be punished. Those types of things.
What type of resources does a school need to think about having in order to implement something like this? Do they need to rethink the way they budget? Do they need to rethink the way they hire, and things along those lines?
Yes, at the district level, school districts need to be thinking about their budgets and how they allocate resources for things like security, versus things like social workers, counselors. I would argue that restorative practitioners need to be in the building. We had a chance to visit in 2017 Oakland, California, Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, and at the time, we visited a middle school, and I think each of their schools in that school district had a restorative practitioner. We visited her room. It was very peaceful, and it was a space for young people to do this restorative work. But that requires money. And so I think school districts need to shift how they allocate resources around these issues, and really think about what is really going to make students feel connected and safe in schools. At the school level, well, and then you also think about training. That costs money. So training for district officials, school officials in restorative practices, having restorative practitioners, and just a whole different approach. Because again, going back to the difference between punitive and restorative discipline, restorative discipline takes a lot more time. Suspensions are easy, expulsions are easy. You need time and people and staff time to really implement these restorative responses to student misbehavior. Yeah, those are some of the resources and partnerships. So it's my understanding that SLPS, much of how they kind of get the resources to have social workers in the building, it's through partnerships with outside organizations. And so I think that could be another way to get restorative practitioners in all of the school buildings.
The big push for the Education Task Force of MCU is to shut off at the source the school-to-prison pipeline. That's sort of our goal within our structure, because that school-to-prison pipeline is our big issue. So talk to me about how what you're talking about relates to that.
I've seen it play out. We had relationship with a young person, went to DC with us, met then Senator McCaskill talking about violence in the community. And we had a lot of hope, and still do, for his future. He was expelled from school. As he was in between schools, he got involved with some things that he shouldn't have been involved with, and ended up getting charged and sent to prison. And so that I've seen the school-to-prison pipeline in action, and it's my belief that if he had been able to stay in school, if there would have been, and I know some people might think this is too idealistic, but if there had been a way to have a conversation, to talk with them about the impact of his actions on that other student, instead of him being expelled, I don't think he would be in prison today. And I know that there are other young people in similar situations, just being pushed out of schools because, either they're expelled or through multiple suspensions, or even, I think the research shows that one suspension increases, I can't remember the percentage, increases your likelihood that you'll end up in the criminal justice system. So if we can, in schools, as MCU is trying to do, break that pipeline through restorative practices, restorative justice, through policies and budgets that as you talked about, kind of shut off the valve that pushes students farther down the pipeline, the better we'll be. So, I'm definitely appreciative of the partnership with the Education Task Force and MCU, allowing me to speak on these issues here, but then also, our partnership with the Real Student Safety Campaign, trying to get school districts to rethink budgets and how they consider, security and safety, and how we can really invest in our students in a way that doesn't further push them down the pipeline.
Talk a little bit about your relationship with MCU to this point. What types of things have you worked on with MCU?
We've more intentionally over the last year or so have been trying to work together around school issues. And so this past summer, we collaborated on the Children's March with Reverend Dr. Dietrich and others there at MCU, kind of leading the community and helping. We framed that march in terms of invest, divest. So we want to divest from punitive models that push our students down the pipeline, which is why we started at the police headquarters. We want to divest in the same way that we want to divest in the community setting from structures and systems and institutions that are harmful to our community, and invest in structures, people, institutions that actually bring the safety that we want to see. We're at we collaborated on that march, and continue to collaborate when it comes to agitating different school districts based on, where our relationships are, agitating them to push them in a more restorative direction.
Okay, great. So tell me a little bit more about the American Friends Service Committee. What is it and what's the mission?
So the American Friends Service Committee is a Quaker organization that was founded in 1917. It's an organization that promotes lasting peace with justice as a practical expression of faith in action. And so the AFSC works on a number of different issues internationally: economic justice, immigrant rights, peace building, justice in Palestine and Israel, and ending mass incarceration. AFSC has been in St. Louis for a while, I think over 50 years. We came in the late 60s doing counter recruitment work around the Vietnam War, and have done a number of different types of work through the years. And when I came on, the charge that I was given was to work with young people around issues of violence and systemic oppression. And so that's what we try to do here.
Okay, great. And do you have any events or activities coming up that you want listeners to know about?
Sure. So currently we have a survey that we have put out to the community around discipline in schools, but also security and police in schools. And so we're just trying to get a sense of where people are at on that issue. We also have monthly meetings with young people. And so information about that survey and then the monthly meetings are kind of on our social media, on Facebook and on Twitter. And that's kind of what we have going on currently. We also we're in the process of developing an application for a youth board that will kind of be our core base of youth organizers in this work. So that's going to be coming out in the next 2 to 4 weeks. So be on the lookout for all those things.
Okay, great. And that leads me to the last question, which is what's the best way to contact or learn more about what you are up to and what the organization is up to?
Yeah, so folks can reach out to me. My email is JSaleem, that's SALEEM as in Mary, at afsc.org. But then on social media as well, you can search for AFSC St. Louis on Twitter and Facebook.
Okay, great. We'll put some links in the description for the podcast so people can click on that. And I also want to put a shout out for the MCU Education Task Force. I know that they are also interested. Right now, a lot of the leaders in the task force are former teachers who dearly love teaching and kids and want the best for them. But the task force would really love to have parents involved in the task force. If you are a parent that is seeing something going on in your school that is not right for your kids, contact MCU. You can find us at our website of mcustlewis.org. You can find our contact information there because we really want you, the parents, to be advocates as well, that we can work together on that. So it has been great having you with us, Joshua. So thank you for joining us. And I want to remind folks that Joshua Saleem is the Peace Education Program Director for the American Friends Service Committee. To learn more about MCU, go to our website, mcustlewis.org, and also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for news and events. And I'm Kevin Prang, and you've been listening to This Is What Democracy Sounds Like. Tune in again next time, and thank you for listening.